So today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Judith Coche with us. She'll tell you a little more about herself, um, but she's going to read Kitchen Table Wisdom, and then there are questions, and at the end we'll go through those questions. Judith, do you want to ask the questions, or do you want somebody else to ask them?
Doesn't matter.
Well, I think since it's your piece, if you don't mind doing it, we would be glad to do it. Great. During the read, if you have questions that come up, please just use the chat function, which is down at the very bottom. You just click on that and you can type in to everyone. That's the choice that comes up. And we'll answer those questions. But at the end, we have lots of good discussion questions. And I'm just going to read a little bit about Rachel Naomi. Is it Reman or Remen? I don't know. Raven, the author of Kitchen Table Wisdom. So she was born in 1938 in New York City. She's an author and a teacher of alternative medicine in the form of integrative medicine. She is a professor at the Osher Center of Integrative Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. Together with Michael Lerner, she is a founder of the Commonweal Cancer Help Program, a cornerstone program at Cornerwell. She is the founder of the Institute of the Study of Health and Illness. She has been featured on the PBS television series Thinking Aloud. Dr. Raymond's most well-known books include Kitchen Table Wisdom, My Grandfather's Blessing, both of which made the New York Times bestseller list. Kitchen Table Wisdom has been translated into 21 languages and has sold over 700,000 copies. She's also the founder of a medical student curriculum called The Healer's Art, used in medical schools throughout the United States. So Dr. Judith Coche, we're so glad to have you and to guide us through this reading in this day. And if you'll please just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and anything about the read that you'd like to before we get started, and then take it away.
So this is a new hello to most of you. Some of you I do know, and it's good to see you again. I am a clinical psychologist, and I have an office at Academy House at 15th and Locust, and at the beach in Stone Harbor, which is where we came on March the 9th and have been ever since. So we have been back in the city a couple of times, but we are down here in Stone Harbor and having a perfectly lovely time. I also teach at Penn in the Department of Psychiatry, and I teach what we often think of as interpersonal psychiatry. So I specialize in redesigning the space between people, and I've been teaching there for a long time. I teach a lot about groups and families. The book that I am going to share with you is about, if it's not my favorite book, it's close to it. And that's a strong statement from somebody whose bookshelves look a little bit like Lois Evans' bookshelves do in the back. There is something magical about Rachel Remen. Do any of you know her? Can you stick your finger up if you know? Well, it's a treat, yeah, Pat, yeah. And I discovered her a long, long time ago. And someone said, just read this book. And I'm an impatient reader. And at the time I had a lot of other stuff that I was supposed to be doing. And the book was entrancing. And I kept going back to it, partly because it's little tiny short reads. So I was able to read 3 pages. I'm going to read you a total of 10 pages if we make it through all 10 pages today. And I invite you to discover Rachel Remen yourself. She is now, I don't know, 150 years old. She's not really that old, but she is a giant in the field of what means the most in life. And she is a physician, but she began seeing cancer patients fairly early in her career, and then began to specialize in how to help people get meaning. It took her 4 years, at least 4 years, to write this book, and she is a master at saying things briefly and deeply. So I have chosen up to 5, depending on what we decide to do with this, up to 5 different segments that are somewhere between 2 and 3 pages long, and they're entire chapters. The questions that I put together, Mark asked me to put together questions, or somebody asked me to put together questions. And one of the questions, I'm just going to read them aloud so that you can be thinking about them. And one of the questions I want to ask you is, do you want me to read all 10 pages, or do you want us to stop between segments? Because I'm reading you 5 chapters, and we'll sort of think about whether anybody has a reaction, and I think that might be my favorite way to do this, because it's less structured and it gives everybody a little bit of freedom to say what they want. Put your finger up if you want to do it that way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, we made it. So here are the questions. The first one is, which of these stories do you love, and which meant the most to you, and why? These are not casual questions, but they're not casual stories. They're just short. 2, the stories show us what matters most in life. Do you agree? 3, where do you find your sanctuary? She talks about sanctuaries. Oh, she has also struggled with Crohn's disease. This is a whole thing. And so part of the reason that she began to talk with people about meaning was that she has struggled with, I think, 7 operations in her own lifetime, and has been impaired by Crohn's disease. And it's a wonder that she is as old as she is, actually. 4th question, has someone else's kitchen table wisdom become part of your wisdom? If so, who and how? So I used to tease my father, who died at 94, that this was story number 37, and I had heard it 4 times and I didn't want to listen to it again. But in point of fact, that was his kitchen table wisdom. So we all have things that we can share with ourselves and each other in terms of what means the most to us, in terms of the wisdom that we have inherited from our elders. 5, the book tells us that life is known only by those who have found a way to be comfortable with change and with the unknown. How does that statement impact you? And I made up these questions in about 7 minutes because they are the stuff of this book. So really what I'm doing in a very brief period of time is introducing you to the stuff of this book. So I'm going to start with the introduction. And each of these is about 2 pages. So I'm going to stop, and then I'll ask if anybody has questions or comments or anything you want to say. And we'll get as far as we get, and then we'll be finished.
So Judith, just one point. When you stop, just let Molly, who is the tech host, know that you're finished with that chapter, and then Molly will unmute people so that
Good.
they
Thank you, Molly. Yeah, great.
And then each time Molly will do that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
We carry with us every story we have ever heard and every story we have ever lived, filed away at some deep place in our memory. We carry most of those stories unread, as it were, until we have grown the capacity or the readiness to read them. When that happens, they may come back to us, filled with a previously unsuspected meaning. It is almost as if we have been collecting pieces of a greater wisdom, sometimes over many years without knowing. My mother was a woman who was full of stories. As a public health visiting nurse, she had sat at many kitchen tables, drinking tea and listening. At the age of 84, she chose to have cardiac bypass surgery. I love the chose. She chose to have cardiac bypass surgery because it was the last chance she had for life. Even so, the odds were long, 4 chances in 10 that she would not survive the operation. But my mother was not your ordinary elderly lady. She had lived her life as a maverick and as a risk taker, and to her, those odds looked good. The morning of her surgery, I came to her hospital room 2 hours early, only to find that her surgery had been moved forward, and I was barely in time to kiss her before they took her upstairs. Despite the sudden change in plans and the daunting odds she was facing, my mother was peaceful, even radiant. "Oh, good," she greeted me. "You're here. There was something I wanted to tell you. I wanted to be certain you knew that no matter what happens here, I am satisfied, and I hope you will do whatever you can to be satisfied as well." Then she smiled her charming, rakish smile, and they took her away. These were her final lucid words to me. For a long time, I thought about those words, trying to understand what they had meant. My mother had achieved a great deal in her life, but I did not think it was this that had given her such ease and contentment in the face of possible death. Slowly, I have come to understand that the key to this sort of satisfaction lies in the inner world, the world of stories and memories. It comes not from any outer achievement, but from the richness of experiencing life and sharing the inner experience of life with others. After 35 years of being a physician and more than 40 years of living with my own life-threatening illness, Crohn's disease, I too am a woman who is full of stories. Stories I have lived and stories I have been told. I have stories about being a daughter, a granddaughter, a friend. Stories about being a patient and stories about being a doctor. Stories about other doctors and patients and things they have told me. Stories about my cat. Stories about things I do not understand. If I were sitting at your kitchen table, the way a family physician used to do, these are some of the stories I would bring with me. Every one of these stories has helped me to live. That's the first reading. Anybody comments or questions?
We just need a minute while people get unmuted, and then
Yes, I've unmuted everyone who I can. Other people may have chosen to mute regardless.
Okay. So if people have chosen to mute, you would have to unmute to have a discussion about the question.
Anybody reactions to what you've just heard? Does anybody know this book? Yeah, wait just a second. Does anybody know this book? Great. Okay, Pat, yeah. Linda?
You have to unmute, Linda. Sorry, you're still muted. There we go. Good.
I just think her mother gave her a wonderful gift when she told her, you know, she was satisfied, and she hoped that she would be satisfied too. I just thought that was a wonderful gift to give her daughter.
I felt very moved by this story, and I thought about something that I quite frequently hear people in their elder, well, not elder, but 60s, 70s, 80s that regret of their age, and they say, oh, when I was young, I was able to do so many things. And my answer always is, oh, come on. We are so rich now. We are able to see life through other perspective. And well, I guess if we're lucky, we're a little wiser than when we were younger. So I guess that's why I felt so moved.
That's a lovely philosophy, Lenore. Other people share that philosophy? It's lovely. Lois is nodding.
Yeah, the comment I was going to make was that I just, she pulled us right into the book, I thought, with this first chapter. I just feel a lot of intrigue, waiting to see what some of the stories are that she's going to share. So it was a very good first chapter, I think, in that regard.
Good. Shall I go on?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
this one is 2 pages as well. One of the things about her wisdom is she is really brilliant, and she manages to say things in small bites so that you can savor them and it doesn't feel like you're too full when you're done. This is called a naming and awe. A label is a mask life wears. We put labels on life all the time: right, wrong, success, failure, lucky, unlucky. Maybe as limiting as a way of seeing things as diabetic, epileptic, manic depressive, or even invalid. Labeling sets up an expectation of life that is often so compelling we can no longer see things as they really are. This expectation often gives us a false sense of familiarity towards something that is really new and unprecedented. We are in relationship with our expectations and not with life itself. Which brings up the idea that we may become as wounded by the way in which we see an illness as by the illness itself. That is absolutely true in mental health. Belief traps or frees us. Labels may become self-fulfilling prophecies. Studies of voodoo death suggest that in certain circumstances, belief may even kill. We may need to take our labels and even our experts more lightly. Some years ago, I served on the dissertation committee of a woman in the Midwest who was studying spontaneous remission of cancer. Among the people who answered her ad in the paper asking for people who thought they might have had an unusual experience of healing was a farmer who had done exceptionally well despite a dire prognosis. On the phone one evening, she told me about him. She felt his outcome was related to his attitude. He didn't take it on, she said. Confused, I asked her if he had denied that he had cancer. No, she said he had not. He had just taken the same attitude towards his physician's prognosis that he took towards the words of the government soil experts who analyzed his field. As they were educated men, he respected them and listened carefully as they showed him the findings of their tests and told him that the corn would not grow in this field. He valued their opinions, but as he told my students, a lot of the time the corn grows anyway. And I have to smile at that one because my husband and I had a farm in Maryland and we grew corn. In my experience, a diagnosis is an opinion and not a prediction. In my experience, a diagnosis is an opinion and not a prediction. What would it be like if more people allowed for the presence of the unknown and accepted the words of their medical experts in the same way? The diagnosis is cancer. What that will mean remains to be seen. Like a diagnosis, a label is an attempt to assert control and manage uncertainty. It may allow us the security and comfort of a mental closure and encourage us not to think about things again. But life never comes to a closure. Life is a process, even mystery. Life is known only by those who have found a way to be comfortable with change and the unknown. Given the nature of life, there may be no security, but only adventure. I see smiles. What are the smiles about?
A lot of people are muted. So what we're going to do is Molly's going to leave everybody on muted, but if you've muted yourself, please unmute and then we can answer some of these questions.
Yes, we'd love for you to share some of your thoughts and feelings with us. Sure.
Oh, I have something to say.
Oh.
May I speak?
Sure. Anybody can just speak up when they want. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's really relevant. I have a grandson who has hemophilia. And I learned from this young man not to call him a hemophiliac, but to call him a person with hemophilia.
That's lovely. How old is he?
Now he's 26, and he's a poster child for hemophilia. He goes to Washington. He talks to senators. He's a super counselor at Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Camp every summer. And he's a flourishing engineer and does his own infusions, which have been a lifesaver for him. Because when he first was born, they didn't have preventative protocols like they do now. And here he is, and he's amazing. But he is a young man with hemophilia. And I have taken that through talking about all kinds of people rather than saying he's an insomniac, which is pretty, neutral, and saying he has trouble sleeping or he has insomnia. It's a big lesson to learn, I think.
It's a huge lesson to learn. Thank you for sharing that with us. Anybody else? What? Am I supposed to call on somebody? Margarita has her thing yellow, and Linda's raised her hand. So one or two of you.
The other can go first. Who's the other one?
Margarita, did you want to talk? No. Linda.
Well, this really got to me. I'm a special ed teacher. As a special ed teacher, I have resisted labels my whole career. And I started as the teacher of mentally retarded children. I chose to ignore labels and to just get to know the child and get to know how they learned. And that's how I made it as a special ed teacher.
That's wonderful. I'm going to go on and do a next reading because nobody is kind of screaming at us. And we're on number 3 of 5, and they're very short. This one is called Just Listen. I suspect that the most basic and powerful way to connect to another person is to listen. Just listen. Perhaps the most important thing we ever give each other is our attention, and especially if it's given from the heart. When people are talking, there's no need to do anything but receive them. Just take them in. Listen to what they're saying. Care about it. Most times, caring about it is even more important than understanding it. Most of us don't value ourselves or our love enough to know this. It has taken me a long time to believe in the power of simply saying, "I'm sorry," when someone is in pain and meaning it. One of my patients told me that when she tried to tell her story, people often interrupted to tell her that they once had something like that happen to them. Subtly, her pain became a story about themselves. Eventually, she stopped talking to most people. It was just too lonely. We connect through listening. When we interrupt what someone is saying to let them know that we understand, we move the focus of attention to ourselves. When we listen, we know they know we care. Many people with cancer talk about the relief of having someone just listen. Many of the people I work with talk about the relief of having someone just listen. I have learned to respond to someone crying by just listening. In the old days, I used to reach for the tissues until I realized that passing a person a tissue may be just another way to shut them down, to take them out of their experience of sadness and grief. Now, I just listen. When they have cried all they need to cry, they find me there with them. This simple thing has not been that easy to learn. It certainly went against everything I had been taught since I was very young. I thought people listened only because they were too timid to speak or did not know the answer. A loving silence often has far more power to heal and to connect than the most well-intentioned words. I see people's heads nodding. How does that feel as you hear her say that? What are your reactions to what she's saying?
Well, I have something to say, but I'll wait for other people first. Because I always have something to say.
I know, Pat, I know.
I know, Linda. But if nobody has anything to say,
But you're also a good listener, Pat.
let me know. Let me know.
Do you have Pat? Patricia?
Pat.
Did you have
Oh, the other Patricia.
Oh, I was just going to mention a story of a good friend of mine who usually tells me exactly this. We are very, very close friends, and he tells me exactly the meaning of this chapter, that people don't really have a conversation. They take turns to speak, and each keeps silent only out of a matter of education. So the other one, in turn, will be quiet, silent, while the other one is speaking. And I really, when he told me this, I could not believe it initially. And then I realized by myself that unfortunately happens way too frequently. So I absolutely agree with this chapter. And again, it's very moving.
Anybody? Another person? Pat, you want to hop in?
I will. That's interesting, Patricia, because that's what a word I learned a long time ago for what you just described is a duologue, not a dialogue, but it's a duologue. It's two people each having a monologue.
That's great.
That's good.
On a personal, two comments I wanted to make. One is that I've just taken me a long time, many, many years, but I give up. When I speak to you, not you personally, but you in general, and you say, "How are you, Pat?" And I begin to tell you, and then you tell me your life story, your calendar, everything. And so I have virtual duct tape in my head, and I just put the duct tape on my mouth and I nod. And I make a note to myself that this is not a person with whom I can have a dialogue. But the other thing I wanted to comment, and it's kind of like, it's not immodest. I have a very good friend who is a therapist, and she has told me that the best thing that I do for her, we're very good friends, is when she tells me something that's really hard, I just say things like, "Oh," and she said, "I cannot tell you how rich and warm and loving that "oh" is." I also say things like, "That really sucks." She likes that one. So tell Rachel, I really agree with her. So smart.
So as you listen to the stories and you listen to our responses to the stories, I just invite you to go inside a little bit and check out how it feels to you. And I'm going to read the next fable is probably 200 words long. And then again, I'm going to invite us just to converse about it, and would love to hear from those of you who have already spoken and those of you who haven't already spoken. The house I own, this is Rachel talking about her house, is a little A-frame cabin in the middle of the foothills of a mountain outside of San Francisco. She lives in San Francisco. When I bought it, it was so cramped and shabby that the first friend I brought to see it blurted out, "Oh, Rachel, you bought this?" I started throwing things away the day after I moved in, and for the next few years, I threw away all sorts of things: light fixtures, toilets, staircases, doors. She has never married. Eventually, I took out some ceilings and a few of the walls. So this is her house and her life. The house had belonged to a man who was proud of his ability to fix things. If there was a hole in the wall, he picked up the first available board and nailed it there. If his wife wanted a shelf or a door or a deck, He put one up wherever she pointed. I threw all those things away. Oddly, the more I threw away, the more I seemed to have. Oddly, the more I threw away, the more I seemed to have. Over time, I rented 4 large Grange boxes and filled them with everything that did not belong. As I let go of each of these things, I could imagine my father saying, "Just a minute, that still works. You never know when you'll need one of those." I see people smile. Gradually, the house became simpler, more empty, and the beautiful structural lines of its basic form began to emerge. It became a container for the light. In the end, all that was left was the wholeness. I painted it white. Anybody? Reactions, comments, thoughts?
Isn't it lovely to do it with one that owns life? Just to let the light come in and paint it white. Oh my gosh, lovely.
I guess I wonder, I see a number of us who will have had, I'm guessing, more than one move in our lives, right? And I'm guessing that during those moves, some of us have more relationships in our life. My first husband died at age 49, and so I've been married twice. And so that means stepkids and grandkids and the whole deal, and dogs and a little bit of everything. And I guess I'm wondering, as you hear this story of trying to get to the foundation of what meant something to her, which was this little house, whether that reminds you of anything in your own experience or in your own life. Have any of us moved from big places to small places? Have any of us had to toss relationships aside because they didn't work in our lives? I mean, this is the level of questioning that these stories will promote. I'm just going, anybody want to comment or anybody want to say anything?
I just found a sense of energy in the space that she recreated, that she unveiled by removing all the stuff. It was peaceful and highly, there was a healthy kind of energy in it somehow. It was nice. I actually like clutter, a little bit of clutter, and you'll see all my walls are covered with art things and whatever, and I love all the color and stuff like that. But I need to have at least one space where it's clear. And so that's a space for really reflecting and getting in touch with stuff. So yeah, I think it's important. I liked that little story. It's good.
Lois, thank you for distinguishing between the clutter that feels like it's important and the clutter that feels like clutter. I mean, they're different experiences.
The reason I can tolerate this bookcase is it's behind me. I'm not seeing it while I'm working. The bookcase, everybody's been laughing at my clutter on my bookcase. I said the only reason I can manage it is because I'm not seeing it when I'm working. My back is to the bookcase. I can see it in this picture, but that's it.
Well, people are nodding and smiling as though they really get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I just got the sense of freedom that when you get rid of things or whatever, it does free oneself up for just being able to take more into our bodies, our senses. And I remember several years ago saying, next year, I'm going to get rid of all the people that are needy. And what I meant by that, not that people, with all their special little needs and special little things, and who were, let's say, acquaintances. No, I cannot have this clutter about me. And that's what I was thinking. They were cluttering my life.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about interpersonal clutter before, but I love the term. It's absolutely wonderful. Beulah.
No, I've gotten rid of lots and lots of stuff in my time. My husband was a hoarder, and after he passed away, it was a huge, huge job to get rid of everything that he had accumulated. And I felt so much better when it was all gone. It was all like piles of magazines and piles of newspapers and all kinds of stuff that really had no meaning to anybody, even him. I find myself cluttering things up too, so I can't really criticize anybody.
Ellen?
I don't know if I'm unmuted. Wait a minute.
Yeah, you are.
We heard you say that.
I'm okay. You can hear me?
Yeah.
I think we live right now, at least I find I do, in a clutter of noise. All the little devices, gadgets that we have make noises. You get a fax and you hear a ding, and phones ring when you're out in restaurants. And I look around my house, my husband and I, and we'll hear a ding somewhere. I say, whose is that? Which one is that? Whose phone is that? What's that coming from? And that's a terrible clutter that I think we're all living with this day. At least I'll speak for myself, living with these days. And it's difficult to get rid of. And I think it would be kinder if people turn things off sometimes when they're out, or don't answer that phone, just put your finger there and shut it off. And anyway, that's just a certain kind of clutter that came to my mind while I was listening to this.
Well, one of the things I'm observing, so I've had a very full career, and I still have a career, but it's not, I have more time now. So I've not been as active in working with everybody at Penn's Village as I would like to be. But what I'm aware of is that we're all paying full attention to one another, because I'm accustomed to checking groups to see how groups are doing. That's what I do for a living. And so what I'm noticing is that we're not bringing our own background of clutter in to this space of this short time where we're doing these readings, and people are responding inside of themselves, and some people are responding. So thank you for saying that. Anybody else want to respond before I do another one?
Yes, this is Molly. I would like, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I would like to extend the idea of noise clutter to not just ringing phones, but the constant hum of electric devices. And this is the reason that I take great pleasure, at least in the short term, of power outages. Because the hum disappears. And you realize you've been trying to block it, you've been having to block it out. And so I'm not advocating power outages as a way of life, but I do enjoy them.
You would like it here at the beach. There are a lot of power outages. Beulah, did you want to say? It looks like you had something lit up.
No, no, thank you.
Okay. Anybody, anything else before I go on? Okay.
I just this morning was looking for a book, and I realized that in my downsizing and decluttering, I painfully gave away many, 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 many books. And considering another move, perhaps another move, I said, I think I have to give away more. And that's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it goes.
And if you really miss them, what can you do?
I could get them again.
Or find them online or whatever, right? Yeah.
I can always get it again. Yes.
So this next one is called End Beginnings. And this one is 3 pages long. This is the longest story. I was 35 years old before I understood that there is no ending without a beginning. That beginnings and endings are always right up against each other. Nothing ever ends without something else beginning or begins without something else ending. Perhaps this would be easier to remember if we had a word for it, something like end begin or begin end. For a long time, I never noticed the beginnings. That was one of the first things that changed for me when I entered the Institute for the Study of Humanistic Medicine, the Miller's Research Program at Esalen. At that time, I was just learning how to make jewelry and had cast a silver ring. The design was the head of a woman whose long hair, entangled with stars, wound around your finger and formed the ring shank. Technically, it had been difficult to make, and I was proud of the design. I finished it in time to wear to one of the first weekend sessions at Esalen. I'm sure some of you know Esalen, so this is Rachel talking about the iconic beginning of Esalen, which is a center for mental health and personal development in California. The ring attracted a great deal of admiration and attention. At that time, many craftsmen were in residence at Esalen, and several suggested that I drive back up the coast a few miles and show it to the jeweler at a gallery we had passed next to the road. It was about to rain, but I made the trip anyway and had a wonderful afternoon. The jeweler, a gentle man and a gifted artist, had offered me tea, and we spent an hour or so talking about beauty and the ways in which art reminds people of the soul. Heady conversation for a young academic physician. In the end, I left my ring with him so that he could recast it and sell it to others. I drove back down Route 1 with difficulty. Some serious rain had begun, and the wind was strong enough to push my little car a little bit onto the road. During the night, a wild and violent storm, the last of a long series of winter storms, hit the coast. At breakfast, without electricity and heat, I was shocked to hear that we were isolated. A stretch of Route 1 north of Esalen had fallen into the ocean. We would have to drive many miles south and go inland in order to go north to get back to San Francisco. The gallery where I had left my ring had stood next to a stretch of road that had washed into the Pacific. The building was gone and my ring with it. Through my numbness, I could hear several inner voices commenting on my loss. The loudest was my father's, saying, "This never would have happened if you hadn't allowed a total stranger to exploit you and make a profit from your design. How stupid can you be? And you, a doctor?" And my mother's voice, "You are so careless. You can never be trusted with anything valuable. You always forget things and lose things." Mixed in was the voice of a very young part of myself that kept looking at the place on my hand where the ring had been yesterday and saying, "Where is it? It was right here." In anguish, I went to the edge of the cliffs and stood looking at the Pacific, still wild from yesterday's storm. Down there somewhere was my ring. As I watched the ocean hammer the cliffs, it began to occur to me that there was something rather natural, even inevitable, about what had happened. Pieces of the land had been falling into the ocean for millions of years. Perhaps all those familiar blaming voices were wrong. There was nothing at all personal in it, just some larger process at work. I looked at the place on my finger again. This time it really was an empty space and silent. It was big. For the first time, I faced a loss with a sense of curiosity. What would come to fill up this space? Would I make another ring, or would I find another ring in a secondhand shop, or even in another country? Perhaps someday someone I had not even met would give me a ring because he loved me. I was 35 years old and I had never trusted life before. I was 35 years old and I had never trusted life before. I had never allowed any empty spaces. Like my family, I had believed that empty spaces remained empty. Life had been about hanging on to what you had, and medical training had only reinforced the avoidance of loss at all costs. Anything I had ever let go of had claw marks on it. Yet this empty space had become different. It held all the excitement and anticipation of a wrapped Christmas present. Anybody? Comments? Reminiscences? What does it remind you of? Patricia, sorry.
I guess you mean me.
I'm sorry.
Well, you know, one listens to a story like this, and my comment will not be exactly about the ring or the lost item,
Right.
but this lady of 35, that the first voices that she hears in her brain are her mom's and her dad's, and of course, not with approval. It's terrible, terrible.
It's terrible, right.
And I thought, oh my gosh, she needs to invest a lot in psychology, in therapy.
She has done exactly that.
Yeah. That was my first reaction.
And has gone on to contribute deeply to it.
Good for her.
From her
Good
own
for
experience.
her.
Yeah. There was a yellow light. So, Buell, was it you? No? Anybody? Anybody else? There's one more story, so let me read it, and it is the epilogue. And then I didn't think I'd have time before we stop, but I do. Anything that is real has no beginning and no end. This is 2 1/4 pages. The stories in your life and in mine do not stop here. Many kitchen tables await us, and over time, I will tell you right now that I have my computer on our kitchen table. The stories in your life and mine do not stop here. Many kitchen tables await us, and over time, we may sit again at kitchen tables of our past. One of my fondest memories of the Sunday afternoons is of the Sunday afternoons of my childhood. While the rest of the family would assemble in the living room after lunch discussing world events and politics, my grandfather and I would meet in the kitchen and talk about God. These meetings were secret, as my parents, proud to be modern, viewed God as a slightly more than superstition and laid the solution of all life's problems in the lap of science. They would not be pleased with such talk. So the policies of Roosevelt were hotly debated in the other room, and Churchill's speeches were read aloud and admired. My grandfather and I would sit at the kitchen table talking about the nature of the world. He would teach me the special blessings for the many bounties that life offers, or read to me from the ancient texts he always carried in his pocket. Occasionally, he would encourage me to memorize a passage, usually from Psalms or Proverbs, a little book called Pirkei Avot, which must be in Hebrew. There is not really a religious overtone to her writing, but when she talks about her grandfather or her history, she brings in the role of religion. That is not the way she usually thinks. The Psalms and Proverbs were beautiful and easy to remember, and the blessings too, but the sayings were difficult for me as they were complex and subtle, a bit much for a 6-year-old. So I want you to imagine her grandfather. She's 6 years old and her grandfather is teaching her important things. But I could see how much my grandfather loved these words, and supported by his love, I would try to understand them and learn them by heart. When my attention flagged, my grandfather would encourage me to continue with the tiniest sip of Manischewitz sacramental Concord grape wine, which he kept hidden in the back of the refrigerator. It was a blatant bribe. I loved the wine. I remember struggling with one of the sayings. It was in the Jewish koan: if I am not for me, then who is for me? If I am just for me, then who am I? And if not now, then when? The words made no sense at all to me, and even my grandfather's patient explanations did not help. Finally, I cried out in frustration, "Grandpa, I don't know what that means." "Ah, Neshumala," he said, "then remember it and wait. Someday, if you need to know it, its meaning will come to you." I looked at my beloved grandfather shocked, seeing for the first time that he was old. Perhaps he would not be with me to share my questions for all of my life. Perhaps someday he would die and I would be alone with them. I burst into tears, overwhelmed. Manischewitz has bottled wine in the same square bottle for more than 70 years. How many of us know Manischewitz wine? Many things come close to me whenever I pass a bottle in the supermarket. Perhaps wisdom is simply a matter of waiting and healing, a question of time. And anything good you've ever been given is yours forever. Anybody reactions? Beulah. Beulah, did you have your light on? No? Pat,
No.
yeah, no?
I do.
Okay. Pat?
I have
Well,
two.
there's somebody that wants to talk.
First Pat, then Patricia.
Okay, so this is kind of tangential a little, but I think it's very connected, at least it is for me. The kitchen table is important. And the first time I ever became aware of that was in a very important book in my own development called A Different Woman by Jane Howard, who traveled the country interviewing. It was at the height of the feminist revolution. And she traveled the country meeting different women and talking to them about these issues. And the best one for me, she's in the Midwest. She goes into this house and sits down at the kitchen table with 3 other women. And their conversation was pretty much, "So how are you? The same, better, or worse?" They all knew what they were talking about. And I thought, isn't that brilliant? And it's true, because there's very few people in the world with whom you have that kind of relationship where you can say, it's the same, it's better, or it's worse. That's one thing I thought of. The other is Vote, which is an important book for me as well. It's called The Ethics of the Fathers. And I led a class once on Pirkei Avot. Not that I'm an expert. All I did was facilitate the discussion. And now I'll share something really personal, which is my husband, blessed memory, and I were on our sailboat, living on our boat. And every morning I woke up and I was journaling. And mostly it was about what I was going to do with the rest of my life, because I was only 70 and I had to figure out what came next. And I would read one verse of Pirkei Avot and write on it. And I wrote and wrote and wrote about what that saying meant to me. So I highly recommend Pirkei Avot to learn a lot about life lessons.
Thank you. I'm aware that we are almost out of time. I'm accustomed to starting on time and ending on time because of what I do for a living. Mark, do we end on time?
Nope, we can go as long as you want.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that Patricia gets to say what she wants to say.
I just wanted to share that this reading reminded me, actually brought to my heart, not only to my mind, but to my heart, my own kitchen table at home in Argentina. Oh my gosh. And the whole family, this is usually Sundays at noon, usually with a barbecue, because in Argentina, you know, it's traditional. It's gotta be a barbecue. And we are talking this big table with 20-something family, because everybody lives in the same city. And so rich, because we are talking, I was recently married, I was in my early 30s, and I was able to listen to the, you know, elders, my husband's mother and her friends, and it was so very interesting. I thought that I was being enriched by listening to them. And time passed, they ended passing away. Time is, from that point of view, you cannot stop it. And eventually that very table got so old, it was falling apart. It was almost dangerous because it was very, very heavy. We had to get rid of it. But believe me, I miss it. I miss it.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end this hour. I'm going to show you the cover. This is Kitchen Table Wisdom, and this is Rachel Remen. And I'm guessing that she's 80-something now. If you look her up, you will find her. I have very much enjoyed being with you over the last hour. It's one of the first things that I've done with all of you, just because of the rest of my life, but not the last. Mark, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Judith. I want to say thank you. It's great to
Yes,
see
Judith, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
I hope to see some of you in person soon.
Yeah,
I
and
hope so. That would be lovely.
I think we all have something to think about for a long time from just the reading you shared. So thanks for stimulating that in us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
everybody
you so
for
very much.
coming.
Mark,
Thank you.
thank you again, Mark, for all that you do.
Yes,
Oh.
really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mark.